The situation in Sri Lanka, as I explained earlier, there have been. It was about 30 years, if I'm correct, that there was this separatist revolt on the island of Ceylon, which we now call Sri Lanka. Think of these people every time you drink tea and you see Ceylon on your tea bag, because that's where it comes from. And I was just thinking back there when I was eating one of those delicious muffins, I was thinking about some of the people in Sri Lanka that I saw after the tsunami. You know, this whole thing is all about global solidarity. And I never will forget, there were families, they had these they were kind of like tillers, but they're two-wheeled machines that had power going to both wheels. There weren't two other wheels, but they would hook up trailers that had two other wheels to these tillers. And they loaded the trailers up with whatever food they had, and they drove those things all the way across the island to help people who had suffered from the tsunami. And they had solidarity for those people, and they were so determined to help those people that they gave up what little food that they had to help the people on the other side of the island. So it's that type of generosity and determination that I think compels Rotary. You know, people may be on the other side of the world, but you're going to jump into your tiller that maybe goes 2 miles an hour or 5 miles an hour at the most, and you're going to take what little food you've got to help them, to help people on the other side. So to me, the people of Sri Lanka were just an amazing inspiration, and I do want to clarify that whatever I know about conflict early warning and early response is because of the people in Sri Lanka. They're the ones who taught me. We talked about conflict can either be destructive or constructive, violent or not violent. And I want to just mention real quickly, those of you who know what it's like to trade stocks, a lot of times people realize that, you know, there are different kinds of indicators. Fundamental indicators or structural indicators are things like, you know, the profitability of a company, price to earnings ratio, etc. But there are technical indicators that are more like momentum. You know, how many people are buying the stock and where is the price going? And those are the kinds of things that day traders look for. Conflict early warning and early response is more like being a day trader than a long-term investor. A long-term investor are the ones who do risk analysis, like we were talking about before. So just keep the day traders in mind, the people that buy stock and sell it quickly trying to make a profit. They're looking at very dynamic things that are happening in a relatively short period of time, and they're looking for acute changes over time. So in the world of violence prevention, structural prevention is addressing the injustices. Operational prevention is preventing violence before it happens. It's responding to incipient violence. You have to be there in a timely way. It's nipping violence in the bud. So keep in mind that Rotary will want to focus on structural prevention as well as operational prevention. But as I tell, you know, students that I talk with about this, if you were going to build a building, wouldn't you put in a fire suppression system? You know, if you're going to try to build a just society that has the rule of law, that where people aren't discriminated against, where everybody has equal opportunity, you can focus on structural prevention like that. But wouldn't you also put in an early warning system? If things start getting bad, you can respond to them. Sri Lanka was one of 4 of the Asian tigers that I studied when I studied economic development. It was one of 4 Asian tigers. There was South Korea, Taiwan, Sri Lanka was the other, and I can't remember the 4th one. But it was a growth with equity success story. It was a success story of high literacy, of excellent health indicators, even with low income per capita. It was one of the Asian tigers, and it melted down into economic malaise over 30 years of violence. And there was a history of discrimination, a history of the Tamil people feeling like they were second-class citizens. There were some Tamil troublemakers who killed some police officers. And then the government, the people in authority, told the police officers that they needed to teach the Tamils a lesson, and it got out of hand. And, you know, it became very violent. And at that point, the insurgency, the separatist revolt, was initiated. So having an early warning, an early response system is important. It's just as important as when you build a building, you want to put sprinklers into it. When you build a city, you want a fire department in it. When you build a society that has significant tension, you better get an early warning and an early response system in place that's effective. This is the, in the case of Sri Lanka, I had read a book called The Deadly Ethnic Riot by Donald Horowitz. He published it in 2001. And in that, he outlined something that's really an amazing insight, and that is that there are social psychological processes that occur when people are building consensus to become violent. You know, killing other human beings certainly is not an easy thing. It's really, I would say, not a natural thing. People build consensus. They develop a collective understanding of what they have to do. And so an early warning system needs to be capable of identifying events that indicate that this is happening, or signals that indicate that this is happening. And so there are underlying conditions, many of which can be dealt with in a structural way. And then oftentimes there's a precipitating event. In Sri Lanka, the precipitating event was that protest where lots of Tamils were basically slaughtered by the police. That was a precipitating event. Then there's a lull, a period of time where consensus building is taking place before violence happens. And during that period of time, there is acute emotional engagement, a sense that it's justifiable to kill others, an exaggeration of the threat that's posed by the other group, a sense that we don't have any risk in attacking them, and then a sense that we don't have any other options. Sometimes we need, as I said, we need to keep track of events. Someone's been harassed at a checkpoint, or we need to keep track of signals. And an example that I heard of in Lebanon of signals was when children of different ethnic groups, of different ethno-religious groups, aren't playing together at recess when they normally do, then something is brewing. Consensus building is taking place. There's likely to be violence. So you're looking at both events and signals when you're developing an early warning system. And you can crowdsource, oh, you know, somebody said that when the little kids aren't playing together at recess, we should send in a text message. You're crowdsourcing information that will help you understand where violence is likely to erupt and when. This is a sequence: increasing tension, moving towards a precipitating event. You start seeing signals and events during the lull, and then you get violence. Okay? So the early warning system needs to be detecting. You keep track of tensions building, you identify precipitating events, and then you take initiatives in the right places with the right people in order to prevent the violence from happening. The question that I was struggling with when I was there is, how long is the lull? How long do you have? Okay, so we're using the Al Gore's failed state methodology. I'm sorry, we're sitting in Washington, D.C. You know, something just happened on the ground in Sri Lanka. How much time do you have to respond to it? These are the events data, some of the actual events data that was put together by the Foundation for Coexistence, and it has to respond to who did what, to whom, where. And in this case, we have major events, sub-events, who initiated it, the Sri Lankan Army, the LTTE, the Tamil Tigers, who was a recipient, civilians, youths, how many injuries there were, how many deaths there were, what kind of damage was done to property, was the information about this event credible or not, and who was the source of it. Was it the media? Was it somebody who called in? Was it one of your staff members who sent in the information? All of these data were collected. After a 4-year period, they had collected 24,000 events. And they had produced reports for people at all levels. People locally that were running non-governmental organizations, people at the mid-level who were, say, in the county government, the provincial government rather, and then people at the very top, including government officials, army officials, officials within the Tamil Tigers, diplomats from the outside, UN officials. They would compile reports on the basis of what they were seeing in terms of trends of the data and locations of those trends. And they would essentially assess this. There's a great deal of tension in this community, and there needs to be, we need to be careful so that it doesn't become violent. And we interviewed, I had I had 2 other people who I had working with me on this project, and we interviewed quite a few of the people who were recipients of these reports, and they really found them helpful. I mean, think about basically all of the white noise out there when you're in a situation like in Sri Lanka where there's regular violence along ethnic lines. It's like noise. It's how do you make sense of it all? And what you're trying to do is you're trying to systematize it and analyze it in a methodic way. So one of my colleagues at Notre Dame and I pulled together the data for provocations and the data for violence. We use provocations as a proxy for the precipitating event. In other words, what was an event that was emotionally strong? Something that would really upset people, right? Events, the precipitating event, and then the onset of violence. And I wanted to find out, really, in Sri Lanka, how much time do people have to intervene? And one of the ways that you can develop an early warning system with these kinds of data is you can use something called pattern recognition. And this is the kind of capacity that you're going to need in your secretariat and capacity that you're going to need in the nucleus program within country. They need to know how to do pattern recognition. They need to know how to assemble events data, how to build a crowdsourcing system and a trust network to get those data. Okay, the length of the lull. We analyzed the data. We used a methodology called survival analysis, which is an epidemiological methodology, something that people trying to identify when there's going to be an outbreak of disease use. And we found that for the eastern province, with the districts of Ampara, Batticaloa, and Trincomalee, I feel a little bit like a weatherman up here. It was on average overwhelmingly 2 days or less between the precipitating event and the onset of violence. 2 days or less. Now, we can't generalize that to all kinds of violence because, frankly, gang violence might have a totally different time frame than a separatist revolt violence, right? So you have to be careful what is the kind of category and what is the prototypical delay. Well, the delay in the eastern province was 2 days or less, overwhelmingly 2 days or less, between a precipitating event and the onset of violence. In Colombo, it was on average 5 days. So we don't really know why that's the case. It could be because there are more police and military in Colombo. More efforts to negotiate rather than just become violent. I don't know, but that's what we found. But it's interesting. I just want you to think about this. In places where you're trying to promote peace and you create an early warning system, and all you have is 2 days at the most usually probably during the day or at the beginning of the second day to respond, you need people in your clubs who can intervene. You've got to have that capacity. You can't expect that you're going to drive to the other side of Kenya or in this case the other side of the island of Ceylon. I mean, you've got to have people there locally who can start working on preventing something from blowing up because it happens quickly. This is all the more reason, these lines right here are all the more reason that an organization like Rotary has such unique potential to have an impact on peace. There's not much time. Okay, there are some ethical considerations here, and I don't want to spend too much time on this, so I'll go through these quickly. But as I worked on this book that some of you have read, I came up with some of these. They're not in my book, but I just had to think through them, and I came up with five ethical considerations. Number one, people who crowdsource in very insecure environments could be treated with harm if they're found out. Sometimes the people in Sri Lanka that were working with the Foundation for Coexistence, they would send information in that really was pretty much military intelligence. There's a Tamil renegade group from the north about ready to attack a village. They were showing up last night. They're camped out over in this location. So they're sending that information to Colombo for their early warning system. Well, what happens if the people in that militant group find out that they've been sending that information? Well, they're put in danger. So the bottom line is that if you're going to engage people in collecting data, maybe crowdsourcing with text messages and that sort of thing, make sure that the likely benefit of preventing violence is greater than the danger they're putting themselves in to send in the information. The second ethical question here is, be prepared to take action before you have perfect information. If you wait around for perfect information, you're going to be too late. It's a matter of, it's kind of like if you've studied the game theory, the prisoner's dilemma, where the prisoner doesn't know if the other person is going to rat on him or not. Well, this is a situation, you don't really know whether it's going to become violent or not, but you better take action because you're not going to know for sure. If you know for sure that there's going to be violence or not, then violence is happening. So you've got to get good at making decisions quickly on the spot to intervene. Another consideration is, as my sister-in-law would say, keep it simple, stupid. In other words, don't get too sophisticated to the point where you're spending more of your time on methodology and computers and smartphones and iPads and all of that kind of stuff. The most difficult part of these systems is not the technology. It's not even the ability to issue a warning. The most difficult part is liberating local capacity. Liberating the capacity of people to go in and either intervene and try to prevent violence from happening or to safeguard a group by evacuating an area. You have to work with people to understand what it's best to do. Do you want to negotiate with these people, or are they going to just start killing people, and in which case, is there a place where you can flee? And if so, how are you going to flee? You'll see a refugee, an internally displaced persons camp or a refugee camp here in just a little bit. Keep in mind how vulnerable some of these people are sometimes. They don't have walls around them. They're living in huts. They're all concentrated. They have no way to protect themselves. Do you want to negotiate when the Janja weed is coming off towards your camp and they've been killing people in village after village? Do you really want to negotiate with them? No, you probably don't. You probably want to evacuate, and you want to do it in a dispersed way so that you're not concentrated. If you're going to try to use nonviolence to bring about greater justice, just like Gandhi was trying to do, and his Muslim friend Abdul Zafar Khan, who did that in Peshawar, which was then British India, it's now Pakistan, there is a Muslim Gandhi. If you're going to do that, if you're going to try to bring about nonviolent change, you better have a handle on how to prevent the troublemakers from creating violence. Because as soon as violence starts breaking out in a tense situation, you're going to get more violence and you're going to discredit the movement. So you really need to use early warning and early response. And thank goodness we have things like social media with cell phones where we can communicate quickly. We've got a break-in at the museum here in Egypt. We've got this person who's come unglued over here in this part of Lebanon. You can then get it on top of this and try to prevent as much violence as you can. Otherwise, the use of nonviolent techniques is rendered worthless because people start becoming violent and you don't have credibility anymore vis-a-vis the military or the police. Your nonviolent movement is ruined. Finally, this is the refugee or internally displaced persons camp. I mean, look at how vulnerable these people are. Imagine, you know, when I was with Catholic Relief Services or when I was with American Refugee Committee, you would go into these camps and you would scope out, okay, what are their needs? They need water. We've got standards, they're called sphere standards. This many people in the camp, this many gallons or liters of water a day is what you're going to need. This many latrines are what you're going to need. This amount of food is what you're going to need, et cetera, et cetera. And then we go in, you know, Catholic Relief Services takes the water, Save the Children takes the healthcare clinics, Oxfam America takes on the food, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees brings in financial support. The blue helmets are running around from the UN, you know, the UN peacekeepers who wear blue helmets, and everybody's sitting there and they think, wow, you know, we've got, you know, people all over the world are here in solidarity with us. We're in a great situation. And then as soon as the militant groups start showing up on the horizon, most of the expatriates, the foreigners, are called out, because their organizations feel a liability that they sent the foreigners in there. They don't want them to get killed. So all these people that have been benefiting from the food and the water and the health care and everything else start to get left behind. They had felt some degree of security. And there's this new innovation in the world. It's called the responsibility to protect. And it's a great thing. But what I'm saying here with this ethical principle is that equally important, if not more so, is the responsibility to prepare. Prepare for the day that you're leaving that camp so that they can help themselves, so that they know how to flee in ways that aren't dangerous, so that they know how to feed themselves, to get water to drink, to get their medicine. It's a responsibility to prepare. You know, these people are vulnerable. You know, American Refugee Committee, after the Vietnam War, were working with, I think they were Cambodian refugees, and what they would do is they would bury tuberculosis medicine away from the camps so that if the camp was going to get attacked, they knew where to get the medicine as they were evacuating. The responsibility to protect is also needs to be coupled with the responsibility to prepare, to help these people be ready. Okay, these were my best teachers. These were the wonderful people with the Foundation for Coexistence. And this is my wonderful wife, Sue.
Thank you, Joe. We have a few minutes for questions that I already have here, and I have actually two questions that relate to the case studies. So the first one would be, in a situation such as Sri Lanka, how do Rotary clubs avoid becoming part of the white noise?
You know, the white noise is the reporting of a conflict, and the confusion of trying to pull it all together in a coherent way. I think that, you know, if the Rotary clubs can provide the capacity to keep track of what's going on and to methodically analyze it and then communicate with people about what's going on, that's a huge service in and of itself. So I think they would be people who are actually not creating white noise. They would be people creating useful information out of the white noise by creating an early warning and an early response system.
One of the issues is that violence can take place years later in response to an event, for example 9/11. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's part of the human condition. You know, I think we try as much as we can to overcome some of these problems, but it's never going to be perfect. You know, this is a little bit off answer to that, but in South Sudan, there was an attack by one tribe against another, and there were peace builders there and the army of South Sudan, and they called for an evacuation. There were about 50,000 people there. Over 40,000 got away. A lot of cattle were stolen, and women and children were killed, mainly. And I guess what I'm saying is, this is an imperfect, enterprise. It wasn't a perfect example of when early warning and early response worked, but it was worked completely, but it worked pretty well. It saved over 40,000 people's lives. Even though we could all kind of look at the fact that, well, it didn't save everybody's lives, and of course that's tragic in and of itself. But we have to be realistic about what we're able to do. You know, the human condition is such that people will remember. There are a lot of people, I know we have some faculty members here today from Portland State. You probably know a lot more about restorative justice than I do. The way that you, in a sense, have a purging of the poisonness of what memory can be is through restorative justice. You try to restore things in ways that people will feel satisfied with the situation. So I guess I would just say that, you know, those kinds of things are going to happen, and we just have to be aware that they will. One of the biggest challenges, you know, we talked earlier about drama, about the humanities. One of the biggest problems in a lot of these societies, just like in the Balkans, little children learn hate songs. Little children learn hate songs. And we've just got to be real careful to help our societies see that these songs where we're demonizing another group are not good. I just want to say real quickly, I want to thank all of you for coming today, and I want to thank Rotary, the people of Rotary, for the invitation to do this. It's a real honor to be here with you, and it's an honor to be working with you. It's so amazing that you're doing this, so I really want to urge you to keep pressing forward. Thank you very much.